Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to a special episode of Live with NORML, Hands Off Ohio's Voter-Approved Marijuana Legalization Law. It's May 13th, 2025. I'm Morgan Fox, NORML's political director, and today we are joined by a number of stakeholders and experts in the cannabis policy reform space to talk about the attempts to undermine the will of the voters in Ohio when it comes to cannabis policy reform. First off, I am joined by Gary Daniels from the ACLU of Ohio. Would you care to introduce yourself, sir?
Mm-hmm. Yes, as said, Gary Daniels, ACLU of Ohio. I'm the State House lobbyist for the ACLU of Ohio. I go tilt at windmills on a daily basis over there, including on this issue, and I'm happy to be here, and thanks to all of the fellow panelists for doing the heavy lifting and putting this together.
Thanks, Gary. Next up, we have Kat Packer from the Drug Policy Alliance.
Hey, folks. My name is Kat Packer. I'm the Director of Drug Markets and Legal Regulation here at the Drug Policy Alliance. I'm based here in Columbus, Ohio. Ohio is home. So I'm pleased to be joined by both local and national advocates to talk to folks about what's happening here.
Great. Thank you, Kat. Next up, we have Karen O'Keefe from the Marijuana Policy Project. Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Of course. I'm Karen O'Keefe. I'm the Director of State Policies at the Marijuana Policy Project, and I live in the dread state to the north, Michigan. And I'm glad to be here, but it does feel like Groundhog's Day since we went through this battle just over a year ago, and we're having to repeat it.
And finally, my colleague, Paul Armentano, Deputy Director of NORML.
Hey there, Morgan. Hey, everyone who is joining us live on the stream. I am NORML's Deputy Director. I've been working in cannabis policy reform now for nearly 3 decades. And this issue in Ohio has been one of NORML's lead priorities this session, and trying to make sure that the will of the voters in Ohio and in several other states is in fact respected.
Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. I really appreciate it. I think this is an issue that is very important to anybody that respects the electoral process, whether or not you actually care about cannabis, but is very, very important to cannabis consumers or anybody that cares about cannabis consumers, considering the potential impact that this legislation could have in terms of rolling back some of the protections that Ohioans voted for. The legislature in Ohio has had nearly a decade of a mandate to figure out the best way that they can regulate cannabis for adults in a way that they see fit, and they have punted on the issue over and over and over again. So voters took it into their own hands, and in 2023 passed issue 2 by an overwhelming margin. Basically, from before the votes were even counted, lawmakers were already trying to roll this law back. I should also mention that once this was actually approved to be on the ballot, lawmakers had 4 months to be able to offer their own legislation to either change or substitute the language, and they chose not to do so. The fact that they're doing so now is a bit of a reversal and really a slap in the face to voters as well as to the regulators who have worked so hard to put the will of the voters into place in Ohio. So let's talk a little bit about exactly what these legislative efforts would do. First of all, let's just point to disregarding the will of the voters. Ohio lawmakers had years to craft this legislation, and they chose not to do so. But now they're trying to change it. Why don't we start off with Paul to talk a little bit about exactly what this means for the electoral process in Ohio, but also what it directly means for this particular issue in Ohio.
Well, Morgan, you're correct. Whether one believes that cannabis ought to be legal or not is almost a secondary issue. The primary issue ought to be that elections have consequences, and the results of elections should matter. In this case, you're correct. Lawmakers in Ohio had years to craft legislation to legalize the adult use marijuana market. They refused to do so, and they left that decision ultimately in the hands of the electorate. And it is a slap in the face to those voters, the 57% of Ohioans that voted for issue 2. for lawmakers to come back and now play Monday morning quarterback because the voters rendered a decision that some within the legislature disagree with. Unfortunately, this isn't just endemic to Ohio. These sort of undemocratic efforts we're seeing in other states around the nation occurring as well. We've seen recently lawmakers in states like South Dakota, Texas, Nebraska, Montana, all similarly invoked legislative efforts to undo voter-approved marijuana legalization laws, despite the fact that in some of these jurisdictions, we're talking about measures that were passed by upwards of 70% of the electorate. So again, it is important to talk about what this rollback effort will do, but in the bigger picture, people need to understand that democracy is actually under assault, not just here in Ohio, but in many of these other states as well, where voters have made it loud and clear that they want marijuana legalization, and those votes ought to be respected.
Thanks, Paul. Kat or Gary, do you have a sense of how voters are feeling about this attempt to overturn their preferences in terms of cannabis policy?
I can go, Kat, if you want to add to it as well, because you probably have supplemental information and thoughts. I will just say briefly, the ACLU of Ohio, we're a civil liberties organization, but there's a lot of sub-issues there. We work on free speech, we work on religious liberty, we work on LGBT rights, we work on a variety of different things. And I will say that it seems that nothing activates Ohioans the same way as this particular issue. Our communications, other organizations' communications, when we're trying to mobilize people to contact their lawmakers and get involved, the reception is, over the past couple of years, much larger, much more robust than any of our other issues, whether it's social media action alerts or anything. So clearly this is something for good reason that Ohioans are worked up about. We hope everybody here listening and watching this today and in the future are equally worked up. And if not, we're failing as panelists, but I think we'll do a good job here.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. It seems like, at least during the last legislative session, Ohio Republican lawmakers tried to overturn the will of Ohio voters very quickly. I remember this happened over the holiday last year, and folks tried to kind of move it quickly without anyone knowing. I do think that folks are attempting to try and do this without as many people knowing as possible. So I do appreciate all of the efforts of the organizations that are here and all of the stakeholders that have on their own been sharing information, sharing emails, making sure that folks are aware about how Ohio lawmakers are trying to, in many ways, make cannabis policies in Ohio worse than they were prior to legalization. And so as someone who is an Ohioan, but also works on these issues nationally, feel as though it's an important one to make sure that Ohioans are protected, but also, as my colleague Paul was pointing out, contextualizing this with larger conversations about how democracy and the will of the voters is being attacked across the board, and how consumers are under attack and are going to be losing various rights and protections if these various reforms move forward.
Thank you very
Morgan,
much.
I just add quickly too that, as you know, we at NORML generate literally hundreds of legislative action alerts for different bills that we either support or oppose around this country. And in no other state do we receive the volume of responses and people taking action than we do, like we see in Ohio, and in particularly, literally thousands of Ohioans pushing back against these efforts to undermine their vote.
As a Clevelander myself, that does not surprise me. When people try to take our votes, we get mad about it. So let's talk a little bit about exactly what these bills will do. And, unfortunately, we forgot to name the monsters. We're talking specifically about SB 56 and HB 160. Karen, could you talk a little bit about what new crimes for activities that Ohioans don't think should be crimes would be, recriminalized or created because of the passage of either of these bills?
Sure, it's a long list. It would be much shorter to say what would be legal under them. It would be basically a minefield of recriminalization that would trip people up for all kinds of things you can do with alcohol or any other legal substance. If you were to pass a joint or share your homegrown cannabis or share your cannabis with your spouse or your roommate, you'd be a criminal again. If you got your cannabis from anywhere other than an Ohio dispensary or your own personally grown cannabis by yourself, not even your roommate or your spouse, you'd be a criminal again. That means if it came in from Michigan, even if you live in Michigan and are just doing a day trip. If you have a cannabis in your car in a container that has ever been opened and it's not in your trunk or way in the back, which means it would be kind of hard to ride in a Lyft or Uber if you had to put your cannabis in the trunk. If you, under the Senate bill, stored cannabis in your own container instead of the container it came in, if you were to vape cannabis in a rental home and your landlord bans it, and under the Senate bill, you couldn't smoke or vape cannabis literally anywhere outside, even in your own backyard, even in your own porch. You also couldn't smoke it in a car. And if you were a tenant, you couldn't smoke it in your home if your landlord banned it. So it would mean that tenants couldn't smoke or vape cannabis anywhere. The House bill is slightly less extreme when it comes to that. You could smoke, probably, it's a little ambiguous, in your own backyard, unless you're a renter, but you couldn't smoke anywhere other than a private residence or agricultural property. And then there are some exceptions too. So if you were staying in a friendly hotel, or the hotel wants to allow it in their parking lot, or any kind of music venue, you couldn't smoke it anywhere except a private home. So it creates a huge amount of recriminalization and also the opportunity for law enforcement to interrogate people and stop people and arrest them based on you having cannabis in your car again. Do you have your receipt? Where did it come from? Can you prove you grew it and it wasn't somebody else? It just opens the door to a ton of the kind of racially disparate searches that we've seen throughout the entire history of cannabis prohibition. And it could actually result in more people being arrested for cannabis and criminalized than were pre-legalization, because Ohio has had decrim on the books since the 70s.
Thank you, Karen. And just to clarify something that you said earlier, that would mean that you could not consume cannabis in a parked car, even on your own property. We're not talking about driving and using cannabis or in a moving vehicle. This is simply a non-moving vehicle, which, if you're a renter, may be the only place that you can legally consume cannabis. Does anybody else have anything they want to add that maybe did not get mentioned by Karen in terms of like recriminalization of behaviors that are currently legal now?
Just to add that this is not normal. Like, these are activities that are considered to be a part of what I've been referring to, this bundle of sticks. Like when legalization happens, it's not just the ability to purchase cannabis as an adult that's 21 or older. We are supposed to be restoring and creating rights for individuals, and Ohioans did just that through voting for issue 2. They created this bundle of rights for individuals 21 and older to ensure that activities like possession, like transfer, aren't criminalized. And what we're seeing here being introduced through these various pieces of legislation would put Ohio as an outlier amongst many or all of the jurisdictions that have passed adult use legalization thus far in many respects. And I cannot overstate how dangerous it would make Ohio for cannabis consumers. There are so many ways that if you are a cannabis consumer in Ohio, if either of these bills passed, you should consider that the law will consider you a criminal.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of Ohioans out there that don't necessarily even know what their rights are currently. And if many of those rights get rescinded, it really opens them up to criminal prosecution.
Morgan and Kat, I would also add that for folks who don't know, the legislature begrudgingly did let issue 2 go into effect largely as it was originally written this past summer. So it's not as if this pushback is coming because there have been negative or adverse consequences of issue 2 being implemented. The law is working just fine, and Ohioans are happy with it. Lawmakers are trying to meddle with it and act as if that there are issues with the law, when in fact we're seeing the law is playing out the way voters intended. It's simply that lawmakers were never happy about the way voters decided, and lawmakers never wanted this law in the first place.
And I will add very quickly, getting back to the criminalization part of this. There's so much to cover on this, that we could talk about this. I think this sole topic or part of this for the entire event. But just one more thing is when it comes to consuming cannabis in a vehicle, a boat, those types of places, these bills also proscribe mandatory minimum jail sentences. So on a first offense, that would be 3 days mandatory in jail. And it escalates from there with future offenses regarding the penalty level and what the mandatory minimum would be for jail. So you already have a mass incarceration problem here in Ohio. You already have many jails that are beyond capacity. You have local officials who are continually lobbying the legislature for funds to build new jails or renovate their current jails. And here you have the legislature saying we are so hostile to cannabis and cannabis users that we are doing something that is absolutely poison pills in the world of mass incarceration policy and instituting mandatory minimum sentences in jail.
Not to mention the budgetary impact that would have on the state of Ohio when it's already dealing with a lot of financial issues. So beyond the additional criminal penalties, one of the major impacts of issue 2 was that it prevented many forms of discrimination against people for responsible cannabis use. Kat, do you want to talk a little bit about what SB 56 and HB 160 would do in terms of removing those protections that cannabis consumers might have in terms of discrimination, both professional and policy?
I'm actually going to pass things over to Karen to cover this question.
Sure. So SB 56 would completely remove very important protections that were included in the initiative because we have seen cannabis consumers' lives ruined when they were not prohibited. Things like not having your children taken away from you by CPS or in a child custody dispute just because you're a responsible cannabis consumer. Being denied medical care, including a life-saving organ transplant for no medical reason solely because you're a cannabis consumer. Being denied benefits from the state that you paid into and are otherwise entitled to just because you're a responsible cannabis consumer. All of those protections for adult use cannabis would be completely eliminated in SB 56, which passed the Senate. In the House bill, they keep the protections, but they reword them in a strange way. So they only apply for adult use marijuana, which is defined as cannabis from an Ohio retailer, or from homegrown or medical marijuana. So arguably you'd have to prove where you got the cannabis to have those protections, which wasn't part of issue 2.
Does anybody else want to jump in on those? We also know that at the very least, SB 56 would significantly change the way that tax revenue was allocated, deviating from the way that voters approved. I think, Kat, you've definitely talked about this before in the past. Do you want to give us a little bit of a background on that in terms of where voters determined that that tax revenue should go, and what some of the restorative justice aspects of issue 2 would be undermined by passage of these bills?
Yeah, so issue 2 included language that required the cannabis tax revenue that was generated to go primarily to 3 different places. 36% of the funds were supposed to go to a cannabis social equity and jobs fund. Another 36% were supposed to go to the host community cannabis fund, and 25% were supposed to go to substance abuse and an addiction fund. What we've seen essentially through both of these bills is the complete elimination of funding for equity-related programming, and essentially trying to utilize these revenues for other purposes. And most concerningly, these revenues would be used for law enforcement purposes. I think my colleague Gary had shared previously how it's pretty clear that Ohio Republicans, both at the local and state level, are interested in utilizing cannabis tax revenue to fund law enforcement activities. The bill HB 160 essentially in part would redirect some of that money to the general fund. But my concern is, one, we wouldn't be dedicating those monies where voters decided that money should go. But beyond what would be a slap in the face in terms of what the voters decided, is that it seems like there actually may be a more insidious purpose behind these cannabis tax revenues, with the money going to, as Gary mentioned, build new jails and fund different law enforcement activities, such that if you are a cannabis consumer in Ohio and you are purchasing from the licensed and regulated market and paying cannabis taxes, you could be very well paying for your own community's criminalization. And that, I think, what is just completely insidious with this entire process is that if these various types of initiatives would move forward, Ohio cannabis consumers would be funding things like mass incarceration, not just more broadly, but specifically of their community when paired with these particular types of criminal penalties. I know that this question was specifically about the cannabis tax revenue. So Morgan, I'll pass it back to you, and you let me know when you want to talk specifically about the equity program and fund.
Well, I mean, we can continue talking about that right now, because the next question was going to specifically address the impact on opportunities for small businesses, and we can get into the unscientific recommended THC cap immediately after that.
Okay, yeah. So just to give folks an overview, in issue 2, there were a number of provisions that kind of fall under this category of equity programming. And I know that this term has been highly politicized and charged increasingly over the course of the last year. But in its basic premise, equity means fairness for all. And fairness for all communities. And part of what jurisdictions that have passed these cannabis policies have done is put in place policies that try and acknowledge that there's criminal justice work and social justice work that has to be done post legalization to ensure that we're restoring folks' rights. We're creating folks' rights and giving folks opportunities. And some of those opportunities that were created in issue 2 were opportunities so folks could participate in the industry. So for example, there was supposed to be, I believe, 50 retail licenses, 40 cultivation licenses available to social equity applicants. But it's also important to note that this equity conversation and business opportunity, which would primarily be for small businesses and local businesses to be able to have an access to participate in the market. But these equity provisions and policies that were included in issue 2 go far beyond just industry access and support. For example, this fund was also supposed to study and fund judicial and criminal justice reform, bail, parole, sentencing reform, expungement, and sealing of records. There's supposed to be monies provided for legal aid and community policing and violence prevention and youth development. So these are all issues that Ohioans decided that they wanted to use their cannabis tax revenues to fund, partially around the equity program, that would be completely stripped from the legislation in both House Bill 160 and Senate Bill 56.
Thank you very much, Kat. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this before we move on? I feel like we've covered quite a bit of material here, but one thing that we haven't covered is the license caps, both how that could affect businesses and how that could affect consumers.
Sure, I can jump in unless somebody else wants to.
Eliminates the smaller businesses as well as a license category.
Yeah, so under the issue 2 that was approved by voters, you had level 1, level 2, and level 3 cultivators. And level 3 cultivators were the smallest that grew up to 5,000 square feet. Both bills would just completely eliminate that license tape for small growers. They also would cap the number of dispensaries at 350. Under issue 2, there is no numerical cap that lasts forever. Regulators are supposed to reassess based on needs every couple of years. And those are the big ones. I believe in the summary that OSU put together, it mentions that they also would do away, it would get rid of the level 3 cultivator licenses and the 50 dispensary licenses set aside for social equity and jobs applicants. Does anybody else want to chime in on that piece?
I'll just add that, it's just interesting to kind of see the specific policies that are being placed specifically around the industry, and make no doubt some of these policies that impact the industry will also, and licensing opportunities will also impact consumers. But Ohio Republicans, when this voter initiative was first moving forward, kind of raised concerns that the initiative was creating essentially an oligopoly of marijuana participants or commercial participants in the industry, essentially saying that their opposition was because they were opposed to big business. And much of what they've done in the legislation that's been introduced and some of the compromises that have been made essentially have turned away from those concerns about big business and have instead completely eradicated any opportunity for small, local, and minority businesses. There are policies that essentially have already, quote unquote, grandfathered, right, the medical operators to be able to participate in the adult use market. And by and large, they're given opportunity to expand the opportunities that they have in the market before any new businesses get an opportunity. So that the haves get more before the have-nots get any. And at this point in time, we're seeing a situation where hopefully we'll see the haves show up and fight on behalf of consumers here in the state of Ohio. But I think it's very telling that we have national and local advocacy organizations right now that are standing up on behalf of and fighting on behalf of Ohioans. Meanwhile, by and large, the cannabis industry, these folks who are multi-state operators have hundreds of businesses around the country, are silent while Ohioans are getting ready to lose their rights.
I think that's a huge disconnect between the industry and consumers in a lot of spaces. And unfortunately, it looks like it's very close to playing out in Ohio unless we do something about it. Before we get into what we can do about it, let's talk about potency caps. I know, Paul, you have opined extensively on this issue and why potency caps are not a good idea for consumers, businesses, or public health. Could you expand a little bit on that and what these measures could potentially mean for Ohio?
Sure. So once again, this is a solution in search of a problem. There is no issue here with the implementation of issue 2. Again, lawmakers' issue is with a legal adult use marijuana market. It's not so much with that there are failings or loopholes of issue 2. Issue 2 did not impose potency caps. Voters, by and large, don't like potency caps for cannabis. That's why virtually none of the legal states right now impose such arbitrary THC potency caps. In fact, they're also not particularly popular even in other jurisdictions with lawmakers, as in many states, these sort of proposals have been introduced and they've been defeated, like most recently in Colorado and Montana. There's no good evidence that higher potency THC poses some sort of unique threat to health as opposed to more moderate or low potency products. What we do see is that there is among some consumers a demand for these products, and that demand is going to exist whether or not these products are available at legally licensed retailers or not. So if we simply remove these products from the market, we're not going to get rid of the demand, but what we're going to do is drive the production of these products to the unregulated market, and we're going to drive the consumers who desire these products away from the legal market and back into the arms of the unregulated market, thereby defeating one of the overriding goals of legalization, which is to provide consumers with a safe and transparent marketplace and with products that are lab tested of known potency and known purity. I also just want to go back a little bit when we were talking about the tax revenue reallocations that are being proposed by these bills. And I want to emphasize that there's a bit of a bait and switch going on with local towns and municipalities in Ohio who, through issue 2, were promised to be directly allocated a certain portion of tax revenues that were derived from retail sales of marijuana products in their communities. That was actually one of the inducements to get city councilmen and others to approve local ordinances to begin regulating these businesses. And now that earmarked money is being taken away. And in addition from hearing from concerned citizens in Ohio who are very upset about these proposed changes, we at NORML are also hearing from locally elected officials, from city council members and others who represent these communities, who are saying that they stand to lose now this tax revenue that these towns were depending on, because lawmakers in the Ohio Assembly, they want to steal this money and basically reallocate it to the general fund.
Yeah, we saw that quite a bit with the submitted testimony in some of the early hearings for SB 56, where there was significant opposition to those bills from municipal governments. Hopeful that other municipal governments will stand up and speak out against this attempt to do this bait and switch, as you defined it. So before I move on to sort of the more, I guess, political aspects of this, does anybody else have anything they want to add about the potential impacts of this legislation that we haven't covered yet, or want to add any sort of additional context?
I'll add a couple quick things. In the initial language of the Senate passed bill, it included an increase in the taxes. And that was stripped, but they said it was because that would be part of the budget debate. Governor DeWine has proposed doubling the excise tax on cannabis from 10% to 20%. And so while that's not currently in either bill, voters should also be vigilant about that attempt to dramatically increase the taxes on cannabis, which of course will just make legal cannabis less competitive, cannabis from Michigan and from the illicit market and from intoxicating hemp.
Thank you, Karen. So let's get a little bit into the politics of it. And I want to start with Gary, since you've been up in the State House in Columbus quite a bit more than the other folks on this call, especially in the last week. Can you give us an idea of what the political landscape looks like for this legislation and for cannabis policy generally?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Morgan. As with just about everything that goes on over there, it remains to be seen. So obviously, as we have been talking about here, you have Senate Bill 56, the first bill that was introduced this session to address this issue. That passed the Senate overwhelmingly, and now it has been referred to the House Judiciary Committee. Now it's the House's turn to take a crack at it. But one day after it was referred to the House Judiciary Committee, the House itself dropped its own bill, the other one that we've been discussing here, House Bill 160. So we have these two bills in play. Nobody's quite sure at this point which one will take precedent among the legislators, whether they will cooperate and these will get combined in some fashion. But as Karen was alluding to a little bit with her most recent comments there, there is one other bill to watch out for here, and that is House, at least for right now, and that is House Bill 96. House Bill 96 is the budget bill. That is, it covers the spending of all of the money that goes to all of the things. It's the state operating budget, and they have to pass that by June 30th, or I should say by July 1st, because that's when the state's new fiscal year starts. So they have a pretty hard deadline of passing this by June 30th. Now, as well as all the allocations and appropriations that go on in the budget bill, they also over time keep adding policy to this budget bill, to the point where when they're done, it's going to be a bill that's quite literally several thousand pages long. And one important thing to watch out for here, we're talking about watching, again, SB 56 and House Bill 160, but we need to be mindful, as Karen said, that they might, in a parallel fashion, add some things to the budget bill that impact everything that we're talking about here today. Or what might also happen is you don't see SB 56 or House Bill 160 go much farther because they cut and paste huge portions of one or both of those bills and put it into the budget bill. Right now, today, what is this, March 13th, nobody knows. I've asked around, I talked to people who know the players better than I do in this respect, the movers and shakers, the Republican leadership, and nobody knows right now exactly how this is going to proceed. I think in large part because the House right now is very busy with the budget bill, with House Bill 96, with all of the non-cannabis related stuff. And after the House gets done with the budget bill, then it's going to go over to the Senate. So there's going to be another crack for legislators, to take a crack at it at that point. And then ultimately, after that, it essentially will go to the governor. So we need to be very mindful for the next several months of how they might try to hide the ball, basically, and put this into House Bill 96, some part, all of it. And other bills might emerge. I wouldn't be surprised to see bills specific to taxation and tax levels and allocations, as we've talked before about. We saw a bill last session about using the money from cannabis sales to pay for the retraining of drug dogs because they would no longer be having to detect cannabis. We're going to have them detect something else. So there's a whole lot to watch out for. And Morgan, I can certainly get into the process as well, how people can have an impact. But this is the politics of it. And this is not unusual. This is the sort of the frustrating part of doing legislative work, isn't on any given bill, any given issue. You really don't know how it's going to proceed day from day, week to week. And it is particularly true with cannabis because there are so many different opinions over at the State House, both between the two parties, between the two chambers, but then also differences, between Republicans and Republicans, Democrats and Democrats. So, I don't know what to tell everybody, except, that the same thing that I say with all of these issues is we're going to continue to follow this day after day and week after week and see where it leads us. But it's all rather unclear right now. And I'll say even House Bill 160 itself has not been referred to committee yet over in the House. It was introduced a week ago, but we don't even know which committee that's going to go to. We suspect it will be House Judiciary because that's where the Senate bill has been referred to. But a lot more yet to happen on this particular issue.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I want to get back to something that you mentioned in just a little bit. But we've covered what exactly these bills do that would harm cannabis consumers, that would harm cannabis businesses, that would harm Ohioans generally. Um, I got to ask, just as devil's advocate, is there anything in these bills that would be positive for Ohioans?
I've spent most of my time on the terrible stuff. I think if you got rid of all of that, I believe it kind of unifies the regulatory authority. There might be some more regulation of hemp in HB 160. It's a 120-page bill that just came out a week or two ago. So there might be a couple of minor things, but they're buried in so much terribleness. Oh, the one other thing, the thing that has been touted as if it would make it all okay is adding expungement. And there already is expungement in Ohio that is basically the same as what's added in these two bills. They would let a person with a legalized amount of cannabis petitions, they have to do it on their own and pay a fee to do it, to have their records expunged. But there is already petition-based expungement. So to me, it's kind of lipstick on a pig. It's just trying to make it look better when the essence of it is recriminalization, reducing rights, reducing access, and reducing protections from having your life destroyed for cannabis use.
That is pretty clear. These bills are entirely bad. So coming back to what Gary mentioned earlier, and I want to start with you, what can concerned Ohioans do to prevent the passage of these bills and let lawmakers know that they want issue 2 left alone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, Morgan, I can't get to that without doing sort of a walk people through just a little bit of the process, and I will make this as succinct as possible because I spend an awful lot of time describing it to people, but it is very frustrating. Almost nobody knows how it works that's not tasked with doing this on a daily basis or a continual basis. So bear with me here. I'm going to make this as succinct as possible, like I said. Number one, backing up the train a little bit, Ohio operates on a 2-year legislative session that's technically year-round. Makes us a lot different than an awful lot of other states in that respect. Our legislative session just started in January, which means it still has, a year and 9 months or so left to go. Which is may be very important and crucial when it comes to how long this bill may or may not be, or these bills may or may not be in existence. But in Ohio, you do have an opportunity as an Ohioan or otherwise, you don't have to be an Ohioan, to come in and testify and give your opinion before legislative committees where bills are assigned. And this is where the real pain in the butt aspect comes. No matter what bill it is, what committee, what have you, to give you an example of how this works in Ohio, our committees operate on a week-to-week basis. I can't tell you right now here on Thursday afternoon what committees are meeting next week and what bills they are hearing. Actually, a couple emails have started to roll in during this call, but it'll be finally by Friday afternoon, we will have a full picture of what committees are meeting and what bills they are going to be considering. So there's no like, oh, in a month they're going to have this hearing, definitely it's on the books, anything like that. No, sorry people, it's a week-to-week process. Part of the other pain in the butt aspect of this, and I should mention as well, committees happen on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in Ohio, in the Ohio legislature, except for the budget bills, which sometimes, that bleeds into Monday or Thursday or Friday. But Tuesdays and Wednesdays is when they have hearings. So the other rub is that if you want to testify, you need to get your testimony to the committee chair at least 24 hours in advance. And in Ohio, you can testify in person before the committee, or you can submit written only testimony. That is, you're basically just sending your testimony in like you would an email, a letter, a fax, whatever. But we're talking for the purposes really here mostly for in-person testimony. So to lay this all out, you learn that the committee considering one of these bills on Friday afternoon, you learn that they're going to have a hearing on Tuesday morning. That means you have to have all your stuff together, your thoughts down on paper, et cetera, by Monday morning, because you got to get that in 24 hours, at least 24 hours in advance. They don't make this easy for people to come in, whether you're one of the professionals, whether you're the people who are just, interested in these issues, grassroots, grass tops, what have you. They don't make it easy. And of course, I have my suspicions that that is very purposeful, but that's, a whole nother webinar. So if you do want to be involved in this process, you need to know those fundamental facts about it. Now, if you want to get on the committee email distribution list, which I very much recommend, because then you'll be getting these updates when I get them. You'll be getting them when everybody else, the State House media, other legislators get them, when they send out the email agendas. The easiest way to do this, there is a you can go to the Ohio House website this session. They're trying to make it easy. I think you can sign up particular committees, blah, 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 and get it sent to you automatically. It's a convoluted process. There's some wrinkles they still need to work out. I'm going to skip that entire process because I find it very inefficient at this point. And I will just say this. Look, as I said, SB 56 is before the House Judiciary Committee. We suspect that that's also where House Bill 160 will eventually be assigned. The chairman for that particular committee is Representative Thomas. You can email, and this is what I recommend, Representative Thomas directly by his email address is rep49@ohiohouse.gov. That's rep, R-E-P, number 4, number 9 at ohiohouse.gov. Email him, say, hey, please add me to the email distribution list for House Judiciary, and then you should start getting those emails. So that's you. Again, you'll learn that information just as soon as the rest of us do in that way, and then you can sit around on Fridays like I do, wait for these emails to roll in to see what bills that they are hearing next week. But as always, keep in mind that 24-hour window in advance that you have to get that in. They also make you fill out a witness slip, whether you're doing in-person or written-only testimony, where you're just filling out some information. Yeah, this is my name, my address, my email, my phone number. This is the bill I wish to testify on. Just very, sort of perfunctory kind of stuff. But they will send that with the agenda. They will send the instructions to say, here's the witness slip, fill that out. And then also they will very much emphasize, get this to us at least 24 hours in advance. Now, I say all this with an asterisk as well, because you don't have to testify. I would love to have you testify. I think all of us here would love to have you testify and exercise your First Amendment rights and let the legislators know exactly what you're thinking about all this stuff. But it's very difficult for people. A lot of people can't get to Columbus, Ohio on a Tuesday or Wednesday at whatever time of day that they might be holding these hearings. So you can go on the Ohio Senate website, the Ohio House website, look up the committees, see the members that are on their committees, get their contact information. Absolutely do not be shy whatsoever about emailing and calling those folks and letting them know exactly how you feel about all of this. While a bill is in committee, the best practice is often to concentrate on those members of the committee, particularly the chair of the particular committee. But I'm going to leave it up to you, however active you all want to be. If you want to, send out all kinds of emails and everything to every member of the legislature, hey, go for it. But typically, again, the best practice is to concentrate on that committee and the committee chair. But yeah, best way to do it again for right now is rep49@ohiohouse.gov. Again, that's Representative Thomas. He's the chair of House Judiciary. And I'm also just going to add real quickly before I wrap up this part here, Representative Stewart is the chair of House Finance. That is where the budget bill is, as I mentioned, the budget bill being House Bill 96. Rep 12 at ohiohouse.gov is Representative Stewart's email. So if you also want to keep, extra close attention as to what's going on and you have fears that the budget bill is going to get wrapped into all of this or vice versa, and you want to follow the budget bill very closely and how that proceeds, then you can email, again, rep12 at ohiohouse.gov, email him and ask to get added to the House Finance Committee's email distribution list. So, that doesn't sound very easy. I get it. But that's about as easy as I can make it as far as how to navigate being active at this level with the Ohio legislature.
Thank you, Gary. And that's really important information. I really like the fact that you drilled down into some of the most impactful ways that people that are concerned about this issue in Ohio can impact the people that are most directly responsible for the next stages of wherever this legislation is going. For people that can't make it to Columbus, or that are maybe a little bit nervous about contacting lawmakers that they're not constituents of directly, I know that both MPP and NORML have some tools available for folks. So I'm going to let Paul and Karen talk about those for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. So for folks who may not know who their state senator is or who their state house member is, we make it really easy at NORML for you to contact them. We provide you with talking points that you're free to amend or just use the way we've laid out. So if folks go to the NORML website at norml.org and they click on the toolbar where it says take action, you will see a map of all 50 states. And when you hover over a specific state, like in Ohio, it will tell you how many action alerts we have for bills that are pending in that state. So right now, if you go to take action, if you go to NORML's map and you hover over Ohio, you will see that we have 2 distinct action alerts, one opposing House Bill 160, one opposing Senate Bill 56. If you wish to send a message telling your lawmakers that you oppose these bills, all you have to do is click the link, enter your address and your zip code. Our software will then identify your specific state senator, your specific House representative. They will then receive the email that you send them. We provide you with an enclosed pre-written letter. You're free to just go ahead and send that, or if you want to go and make changes or write your own letter, you're free to do that as well. These letters then get sent, or these email communications get sent. They land in the lap of your elected officials. They read them and they hear you. Look, as Kat said earlier, this isn't the first time lawmakers in Ohio have tried to roll back or rescind issue 2. They tried to do so before the law was even implemented about a year ago. And folks like NORML, folks like DPA, folks like the ACLU, folks like MPP mobilized our constituents to push back through writing letters, sending emails to lawmakers. And what happened is they got the message and they backed off last year. Yes, I get it. It's frustrating. It's disappointing that here we are back again, having to have this same fight again. But the fact is we pushed back a year ago and we won using many of these same mobilization tools, and we can certainly do so again.
MPP has a similar link that does the same thing as NORML's link. You type in your address and your name, and then a pre-written letter shows up that you can write to your state senator and state rep or edit it completely. If you have more time to devote, I strongly recommend calling your state representative, especially because the bill already passed the state Senate, to let them know your concerns about the bill, to ask where they'll stand on it. You will almost for sure just talk to a staff member, say your name, the city or town or area you're from, that you're a constituent, a brief message about your concern about it recriminalizing the bill. Ask if the staffer can talk to the rep and see if they will oppose this bill and get back to you, or if you can call again in the next day or two. Sending an email is great, but if you also make phone calls, then maybe you can get some intel and share it with us. As Paul mentioned, it is not fruitless. It is very dispiriting to see them try to attack the will of the people, but this was defeated in Ohio last year. In Montana and South Dakota, attempts to roll back voters' legalization and medical initiatives have been defeated too. So it is possible. And even if we weren't able to completely defeat it, how terrible the bill is will depend on how much pushback there is and what it's about. Already the House bill, which is also terrible, is slightly less terrible than the Senate bill. As I said, you can smoke in your backyard. The House bill would limit the total number of plants per household to 6, which is currently 12, while the Senate bill wouldn't. So make all of your concerns known and make sure to send that email, call to follow up. If you can testify, great. If you are going to submit written testimony, it will show up on the website and you can just write it in advance. Since you know you will have very little notice once the hearing's scheduled, you want to have it ready to go so you don't have to try to rush it over a weekend once it's finally scheduled.
And if I could add something else, 30 seconds here. Karen, you brought up a great point in our internal chat here. Representative Stewart, the chair of House Finance, where the budget bill is also the sponsor of House Bill 160. Senator Steve Huffman is the sponsor of SB 56. So by no means, let them off the hook. They should be hearing from you as well if you're concerned about this issue, not just the committee chairs or leadership or what have you, but feel free to reach out to those folks as well. And I can't remember Huffman's email address off the top of my head. I suspect it's Huffman, Huffman at ohiosenate.gov. It was a little more tricky last session. His cousin is the House Speaker. So last session we had two Huffmans over on the Ohio Senate side. Now we just have one. So I assume his is Huffman at ohiosenate.gov, but I don't remember here off the top of my head. But you can find that out by doing just a little bit of searching online. But again, he is the sponsor of SB 56, and Representative Stewart is the sponsor of House Bill 160.
Yeah, I'd also ask folks to consider writing letters to the editor, to their local newspapers. This is an issue that many newspapers, many media outlets in Ohio are actually paying quite a bit of attention to. I dare say from the reporting that many editors and reporters are sympathetic to where voters stand on this issue. And if you want to see more coverage of this issue, if you want to see more favorable coverage of this issue, let your local editors, let your local newspapers know. Write letters to the editors saying that the voice of Ohio voters should be listened to and that lawmakers need to respect it. Mention by name the lawmakers who are trying to roll back this initiative. Lawmakers like to see their names in the newspaper, but they don't like to see their names when they're being criticized in the newspaper. So again, I think this is a really easy way to make it clear where voters stand on this issue and to make their voices heard. Almost every city or town has a local newspaper. If you're a local resident, you have a very good chance of getting published in that newspaper if you send them a letter to the editor. And if you're not sure exactly what to say or how to articulate your position, again, go to NORML's website, go to MPP's website. The talking points are there for you already.
Thank you very much, everybody. We are just about out of time. If there are any closing remarks or final points that anybody would like to make, please feel free to make them now. And otherwise, just highly recommend that anybody that is listening to this that cares about this issue, whether you're in Ohio or not, please make your voice heard and stop this attempt to steal the will of the voters and recriminalize cannabis in Ohio. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add?
I would just share, contact your friends and family on this. We know people who this is directly going to impact. And so we want to make sure that those folks are aware of what's happening, are empowered to push back. Contact your local officials too. This is not just a slap in the face to consumers, but also local governments. And there may be a way to engage them in the process. And I truly do think that this is kind of one of many tests of democracy that are happening right now in the country and in Ohio specifically. And we do need to push back and show that there are folks collectively who are opposed to these types of policies, because I'm reminded when these things happen that things could get worse. And so this isn't to say that this is the last of this multi-headed monster of folks who are trying to recriminalize cannabis. I could very easily see a situation where we recriminalize cannabis, and then a couple months later, a year later, we actually dig ourselves deeper into a hole. And so I think it's very important that we hold the line right now and don't allow politicians to kind of pick us off by making very minor amendments. Folks mentioned this offer of expungement that's not actually going to help anyone. Let's not be tricked or played by Ohio politicians. Let's stand together and tell Ohio politicians to keep their hands off of Ohio marijuana legalization.
Thank you, Kat. That is a perfect way to close this up. We can't let ourselves be fooled by political machinations, and we cannot let politicians steal the rights of our vote. We cannot let them put bad policy in place of good policy, or before we've even found out if the policies are good or not. So far, Ohio looks like it has been rolling along very smoothly, and implementation has been going well. There have been no major complaints from Ohioans, and it's premature for the legislature to try to interfere with it. So, encourage everybody to listen to what the folks on this call have said, to contact your lawmakers, specifically relative members of the committees of jurisdiction, and to talk to your friends and neighbors about opposition to this legislation, because whether or not you support cannabis policy reform or not, having your vote taken away or subverted by lawmakers should be of concern. And whether or not you consume cannabis yourself or not, somebody that you know is going to be negatively affected by the passage of this legislation. So please get out there, talk to your lawmakers, talk to your friends and neighbors, and let's make sure that these bills don't pass.